Okay, welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight I am joined by two incredible, amazing guests who I have to take a moment and just say I'm so blessed and grateful that they agreed to come onto the show. I am so excited to have them on, and the topics we're going to be talking about, I know, are somewhat new topics and somewhat we've already touched on a little bit, but I know you're going to love the topics. And so I'm going to take a quick moment and just mention hello to Heidi Pop in the chat room and my friend Jim Edward. Thank you guys for coming in and watching. And I'm going to turn it over to my guest to introduce themselves. And so I'm going to start with the one, the amazing, wise one of a truly amazing topic I'm excited to talk about, Sheila Seppi.
Aw, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. And hi, everybody. Thanks so much for the invitation and to be able to share with you about walk-ins, because I am a walk-in. But before we start, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. Obviously, I am an author here to talk a little bit about my book. The first book that I wrote was Walk-ins Cosmology to the Soul. And this one is the Cosmic Convergence, Journeys of Walk-in Starseeds and Hybrids, that Barbara Lamb and I co-authored together. So I'm super excited to talk about that tonight as well. But when I'm not writing books, I'm working in my healing center. And also I see private patients. I do sessions long distance with people. So you can check me out on my website, SheilaSeppi.com. I also am the founder of the Conscious Awakening Network. So check us out, consciousawakeningnetwork.org. We're undergoing a huge change right now, and we are adding all kinds of new things to our site. We have a new look, etc. So that's basically what I do during the daytime. So, check me out on the website, check all the websites out. I'll also be talking at the New Living Expo, the Light Language Conference, the Universal Consciousness Conference. So all of those will be up on my website, and you can find out more information about that. And so do you want me to go ahead and share a little bit about my journey of being a walk-in?
Sure.
Okay. So prior to 1999, I was a very sick person, and I had been diagnosed with a whole host of illnesses, including brain tumors, fibromyalgia, bone cancer, you name it. They had this whole list of diseases that they said that I had. And I was in a downward spiral. I was tired. I was lethargic. I couldn't really get off the couch after work. I would play with my kids from the couch. And I went to bed that way, very sick, in pain, frustrated, aggravated, the whole 9 yards, as you can imagine, because when you're in pain, your tolerance level is pretty low. And so I went to bed that way. And what felt like 7 o'clock the next morning, it was as if someone reached down, grabbed me by the hair of the head, pulled me bolt right up in bed, and it was like lightning ran through my body. And then I was in white space. And I don't know how long I was in white space, but I know I was out of pain. I felt all this unconditional love around me, compassion, and it was pure bliss. And if I could have stayed there, I most definitely would have done that. But the next thing I knew, my peripheral vision started coming in and then my frontal vision. And as I looked around the room, everything looked exactly like it had when I went to bed, but everything felt different. And I didn't know why it felt different. Also didn't know why I was sitting up in bed. But I got out of bed, my feet touched the floor, and it was as if I had never felt carpet before on my feet ever. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it felt so gushy. And I was really paying attention to how that felt. And I was like, okay, so then I'm headed across the bedroom and I see a mirror and I just stop and I'm staring in the mirror because it's as if I'm looking out of myself out of someone else's eyes. And I don't know how long I was doing that, but I was checking out my hair and my teeth and my eyes. And really, I was mesmerized. And then all of a sudden, I started having these flashes of past life memories. Now, the important thing about that is number one, I didn't even believe in past lives. So I had no idea what this was that was coming into my forefront of my thinking process here. The next thing that happened, I started having all these universal information coming through, which I had never studied and really didn't understand. And it's taken me many years to even unpack that, to find the languaging, because I'd never read a metaphysical book. I'd never read anything about quantum science. Yet I have all this information about densities and dimensions and parallel lives and timelines. Again, I didn't believe in any of that stuff. And then all of a sudden, my clairvoyance had kicked in, and I didn't know that that's what it was because, again, I had no foundational knowledge. But all of a sudden, the people that I was looking at all around me, I realized were not there, but I could hear them talking to me. Now, I had just had enough psychology to be dangerous. So I started self-diagnosing myself, and I pretty quickly came to the conclusion that I was having some kind of a psychotic break. I thought, well, between the stress, the job, the illnesses, the dysfunctional marriage, I've just totally broke. But I actually had not, but I didn't realize it at the time. And as I went around the rooms that day, I would pick objects up, I would hold them, I would feel them, because it's one thing to hold and touch something, and it's another thing to know what it's like to hold and touch something, because on the other side, there's not the sensation of feeling. Also, one of the things that I remembered was what it was like for the soul to slip out of the body and for the soul to come into the body. So when I began to share this experience with other people, the first thing, of course, is this, and they start backing away. And then the next thing is, because within those first 3 months, I had left that marriage because it was very dysfunctional, but I had no resonance with the person that I was married to. And so I left, and everyone was telling me, you can't talk that way. You can't talk about that kind of experience because you're going to be going through a divorce and they could take your children. So that freaked me up. And very quickly, I stopped talking about my experience. Now, even though I wasn't talking about it, people noticed all the changes because, first off, my eyes were a deep green, and they were not the night before I went to bed, and they continued to be green. And people are like, I thought you had blue eyes. I'm like, no, I've got green eyes. And I didn't know the difference. And my hair, apparently I changed my hair really often, and all of a sudden now I'm just letting it grow longer. And people are like, you're letting your hair grow out? I'm like, well, yeah. And that was something apparently that I didn't do. Apparently I colored my hair quite often and cut it quite often and tried a lot of different hairstyles, but all of a sudden that's not me anymore. I had changed my eating habits. My personality changed. Absolutely everything about me had just completely changed, and everyone noticed it. One of the things that was scary is when I came in, I only had the memories of very few memories of my children and of my parents. And that was it. And I was not attached to my friends, any other family members, or anyone that I knew. I just had no attachment to them whatsoever. But I came in with this immediate love for my children. And so as time went on, the kids, they absolutely loved the walk in personality because all of a sudden I could run and play and do things with them that I hadn't been before. But my family, they weren't so sure. And my mom had sat me down on the couch because we had gone to a funeral. My mom sat me down on the couch and said, I need to have a talk with you. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, she must be sick. She's going to give me some bad news. But instead, she goes, I want you to go to a doctor because I think you have the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. Well, I honestly, I was flabbergasted. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, I noticed at the funeral today, you didn't know anyone that came up to you. You didn't know your high school friends. You didn't even know family members. And I saw how you were trying to skirt when they were asking you questions. So I guess it's true that mothers have that 360 view going on with their eyes that they can watch their kids, because as far as I knew, my mom was looking straight ahead. But when she told me that, I was really dumbfounded, and it was like, okay, I need to let her know what's going on. And I told her, I said, do you remember when I was really sick? And she goes, well, yes. And I said, and you remember how all of a sudden all of the illnesses and everything just went away? And she goes, yeah. And I said, that's because the soul of this body left and a new soul came in. And she looked at me for a moment, and the first words out of her mouth was, does that mean I'm not your mom? And I'm like, no, that means that you're the mother to a new and improved version. And she was just like, okay. And she just left it at that. I told my dad the night before my first book was coming out because I thought, I better let him know, in case somebody says something. And so I told him. And I said, you remember when I was sick? And he goes, yes. And I said, and all of a sudden I was well. He goes, yes. He goes, that's when Jesus instantaneously healed you. And I'm like, okay. And I said, and then you remember all the gifts that came in. And when I was talking with your sister that had just passed, and she goes, yes, I remember. And I said, well, that's because I was the walk-in. And he sat there for a minute and he goes, well, yes, that's when Jesus healed you and the gifts of the Spirit came in. And so for him, he looked at it from his religious, biblical background, and it made total sense to him. And again, we just really don't talk about the walk-in experience, although he has read both of my books. And he's like, well, he goes, you're a really good writer. And I can't say that I believe everything that you've written, but I also can't say that I don't believe in it. So that to me was really good validation. And so that's kind of how I explained it to my family. And they've really accepted it. My friends, I lost every friend that I had. Most of the family didn't talk to me because I was so different. But within those 3 months, as I said, I had left that marriage. And in another 3 months, I moved to a different state. And I had accepted a position. All of this I can see now was very orchestrated to happen, but I accepted a new position. And while I was there, of course, remember this is in 1999 and we didn't have Google and everything that we have today. So I had a telephone directory looking through the phone book to try to find out what amenities and services that there were, because I was going to be moving my family there, my children. And I saw in the back a business card sized ad. And it was as if this light was just shining on it. And it said spiritual counseling. And I'm like, oh boy, do I need that. Because I was already convinced, and everyone else was convincing me that I had lost it. Okay. And so I thought, I'm going to go talk with her. Everything's going to be fine. She's going to write me a prescription, because remember, I had been in the Western medicine model. And so I thought, she's going to write me a prescription. I'm going to take a little blue pill. My dysfunctional life will come back and everything will be normal. But that's not what happened at all. And over a series of a couple meetings, she finally said, I have to say, I cannot find that you're psychotic in any way, shape, or form. I don't see that. I don't see that you're having a dissociative disorder. I don't see that you're having any manic or bipolar episodes. I don't see any of these things that you've expressed a concern in. And I'm like, well, then I don't know what's happening to me. What in the world is going on? She said, have you ever heard of a walk-in? I'm like, a walk-in? What do you mean, walking in to get your hair cut, that kind of stuff? I've heard of that. But she's like, no, I'm talking about a walk-in soul. I'm like, well, what do you mean? She goes, that's when one soul of the body leaves and another soul comes in. And I just sat there and I was like, no, I haven't heard about it. And so when I left, to be honest, I was pretty upset. Because I didn't know. Now, I was sharing with you about my mom, and that was down the road a little bit. But when I first found out that I was a walk-in, it was really hard for me to digest, because I had grown up in the church. You know, my idea of spirituality was religion, and that's all that I had known up until that point. And so I was upset, but I did call her back. I scheduled another appointment and I began to work with her. And shortly thereafter, she invited me to join her women's groups. And she explained to me, she goes, well, you're new in the community. This would be a wonderful way for you to meet some new women. And there was everything from, there were lawyers, there were doctors, there were school teachers, there were single moms, all kinds of people in this. And she said, and we're studying Native American spirituality. And then I find out she's of Hopi lineage, et cetera, et cetera. And so in these sessions, she taught me about shamanism. And when I learned shamanism, and I learned that these people that I was seeing walking around were in fact my spirit guides, which now I know are my collective, which I can talk about that. But the voices that I was hearing were actually them speaking to me. There was this huge relief that left me, because I didn't know anything about metaphysics. I didn't know about spirit guides until that point. And then I began to learn about shamanic journey. And when I was able to travel into those astral realms, I mean, it was immediate for me. I could do it, just anytime that I wanted to. And that's where I started meeting my spirit guides, and they began to talk to me and they began to share information with me. And one of the first things I asked them is, am I a body snatcher? Did I kick the soul of this body out? And they said, absolutely not. We all have a birth plan. And in that birth plan, we have certain exit strategies that if the soul feels it's gathered everything that it needs, that it can leave. And that's what had happened to the soul of this body. Plus, it was very weak and very tired and very weary. And so that is how I began my journey and my integration process with my collective. Now, a little bit about my collective is I am still connected with my collective. Actually, we operate as a symbiotic unit. I have over 128 aspects that interact with me. And these aspects are all aspects of me and them, the multidimensional aspects of our soul group collective that had come back together, because before I entered into the body, we were actually here in the earth. Well, not in the earth, but we were surrounding the earth, working with other like souls on the crystalline grid to help infuse. And actually, we were really radiating out these light codes that were helping to raise the vibrational frequency on the planet and place ascension codes for humanity to raise. And we had started this back in the early 80s. And I didn't come in until 1999 when the soul of this body cried out to be released. And then it was decided I would be the aspect to come in. And because this body was so sick, we couldn't just drop a brand new soul into the body, because we could have fried the neurology and the biology. And that was not the intention. It was the intention to have an adult form in which I could move through and achieve my mission to be a way shower on the planet, like many of you. And you're a way shower, Michael, with your show and bringing all of this information to people's attention and helping them. You don't know how many people you've helped to wake up, but that's why they wanted me here, to be boots on the ground. And so the first aspect of the collective that came in was an Arcturian aspect, because the soul that left the body was Arcturian. And there was already a framework laid in the holographic field that made it easy for an Arcturian to come in and to be able to start utilizing the information in all of this holographic field. Because if something else had come in, we would immediately had to change out the chakras and everything else. But because it was already an Arcturian, I was able to just kind of drop soul information in. And as the body healed, and as I got healthier and healthier, more and more of the soul could come in. And as I began to integrate as the walk-in aspect into this body, and there are many different types of walk-ins and augmentations of the soul that we can talk about too. But as more and more of that came in, more and more of the collective energy also came in, to where now, today, I operate primarily through the Andromedan energy that I carry. That's my story, Michael, and I'm sticking to it. What do you think?
I think it's an absolute awesome and amazing story. There was so many pieces of it that I'm like, I've experienced something like that. I've experienced something like that. So I was like, yeah, and when you were like, nobody would believe, I was like, man, I wish we had reached out at that point and had this then, because I would have been like, oh, I believe. Let's keep going. Let's talk some more. But real quick, I want to turn it over and give Barbara a chance to share some of her story and introduce herself as well.
Okay, well, I have been a long-time psychotherapist, first and foremost, and eventually I got into doing regression therapy. And for a number of years, I was mostly focusing on past life regression therapy. But then in 1991, people started coming to me for regressions, people who had very unusual experiences being visited by other beings who we eventually started to call extraterrestrials. And that work, well, I never expected to be doing that kind of work at all, but it has really developed so that I've done a few thousand regressions now, specifically to people's encounters with extraterrestrial beings. So as that was developing over the years, even in the early 1990s, I was meeting people and beginning to work with them, people who had not only extraterrestrial encounters, but other very unusual things that I had not been aware of before. And I had heard of the walk-in phenomenon by one of my past life therapy colleagues. She had worked with somebody who turned out to be a walk-in. So at least I had a little bit of nominal awareness of that by the time that a first person came to me who was a walk-in. And in that particular case, I met the parents first of this young woman who was the walk-in. And they didn't know about walk-ins, but they were telling me that their daughter suddenly one day had an enormous change and just seemed to be an entirely different person. And it happened that that daughter, she was in about her mid 20s in age, and she happened to be at the same conference where I met the parents. And so I met the daughter and did a regression with her. And it turns out that she indeed was a walk in, and that's why she had suddenly changed. And that was a very, very interesting experience for me, to actually work in person with somebody who had had that phenomenon happen. And she had changed from being a very materialistically minded young woman to suddenly overnight being very interested in spirituality and metaphysics, and had a tremendous desire to form a bookstore with a meeting room so that she could teach classes in spirituality and metaphysics. So that totally baffled her parents. It was all right with them. I mean, that's a perfectly good thing to want to do, but they just thought, well, what happened? So, anyway, that got me into working with walk ins. And then it was, just maybe a year or so later, I was introduced to another woman who had walked in from a very spiritual realm. The first one came from an extraterrestrial realm before she walked in. And the second one came from a very spiritual realm and had the mission of helping to introduce spirituality to humans and help them to grow spiritually. And then there was another one who came from an extraterrestrial realm, and she wanted to help. That's why they all come, by the way. The walk ins come to be of service to humanity. And it's wonderful that they do that. And they do come with wonderful abilities, many psychic and paranormal abilities, and lots of intelligence and goodwill. And a lot of them come in with a lot of light. In other words, they get comments from people that, oh, you just sort of bring light wherever you go, or I just feel and see so much light around you. And I think that that's very true of Sheila and the other people she has brought into her awareness. So anyway, that was really opening up for me about the walk-ins, and I just thought, this is a wonderful, wonderful thing that there are these beings out there in some other realm, either other dimensional or extraterrestrial, and they are aware of humanity, aware of our needing a lot of assistance in growing, in behaving better, and certainly understanding spirituality more. And I think it's a wonderful thing that they're able to kind of take a shortcut, shall we say, in getting here to do their work by doing that soul exchange with a person who, in most cases, is already an adult and doesn't want to be here anymore. Rather than going through life in the womb and being born and growing up through childhood and teenage years and young adulthood before they can actually get to doing the work that they came to do. So I think it's great. One soul gets to leave who has just really had it, just doesn't want to be here anymore. And that one gets to leave and go into the spirit realm and is perfectly fine and is relieved of being in this life. And then the other one, the new one, gets to come in and pick up the pieces and make the big adjustments like Sheila had to do, and go on with their lives and giving the service that they came to do. So, also in doing all of this regression work since 1991, there were people who came who didn't seem to be walk ins, but they also had some of the same abilities and characteristics. And the main thing is that they wanted to know what their life purpose is because they each, independently of each other, they each uh, knew that they were somehow here to do something special, to help humans, in some cases, animals, uh, in a particular way to raise their spirituality, raise their consciousness, and so forth. And so we realized that, okay, they had been born here, and we began to realize that they were what we call star seeds. And in many cases, or probably all of them, they had, before this lifetime, they had had lifetimes as what we call extraterrestrial beings. And then this lifetime, they were born here of human parents, born as a human being. And yet they bring so much from these other cultures and other awarenesses, other abilities too. So then, as life went on, by about 2010, I began to slowly meet some people who were looking like humans and yet had a lot of differences too, and began to realize that there were ET human hybrids who were living here amongst us. So before that, I had been very, very aware with many people who came to me. I had been very aware of the hybridization program that many of the beings out there in space were doing by combining with material, eggs, sperm, genetic material of humans, combining that with some of their genetic material and creating hybrid beings. So from the early 1990s until about 2010, I was very focused in regard to hybridization, was very focused on the hybrids who are mostly hybrid with some human genetics. And so they would not be able to live on Earth, and they tended to live on the spaceships with the beings who had created them. And that is a very, very large program in itself going on amongst many species of extraterrestrial beings. So that's what I had been mostly aware of for a number of years. And then around 2010, it just happened wonderfully that I was getting the experience of meeting certain human people right here who impressed me very much as hybrids without having actually known that there was such a thing as ET human hybrids living on Earth. So I got to know several of them and had the good fortune of being invited to two different weekends composed of hybrids and me, and got to know them very well, and was extremely interested in that part of reality. And then I was approached by a wonderful man, a writer in England, Miguel Mendonça, and he wanted to know everything that I knew about hybrids. And make a long story short, we decided to write a book together, which is called Meet the Hybrids. And so that has lots of detail of 8 different people we interviewed at tremendous length. And I did regressions with most of them as well. And so that really brought so much more awareness to me about hybrids. And every now and then, still, I meet a person or someone will come to me for a regression, and that person will seem like a hybrid, And the more that we discuss it, sometimes the person begins to realize, oh, that's why all of these peculiar experiences have been happening. And that's why I've always felt like I'm not like everybody else here, even my family. And I feel that my family is really out there in space. And these people always have been visited by their extraterrestrial beings, the beings who had added their genetics to that person, either before conception or during life in their mother's wombs. So in this case, with the hybrids, they are born here, carried full term in the mother, and then born here the way that the rest of us are born here, and live their lives. So they did not do a soul exchange as the walk-ins did. Uh, and in many cases, those hybrids had those souls had previously been various species of extraterrestrials as well, so that there was sort of this innate familiarity with the beings without culturally knowing about it here on Earth. So I think it is a wonderful thing that there are these three types of beings who come to us to help. It's completely benevolent. And with all of the negative things going on in the world right now and probably forever, but so much is emphasized now, so much is coming out of the darkness, really horrible things that have been going on that have been relatively hidden. And we're all becoming, very aware of the nuclear threat and the various wars going on and how war could involve us imminently, and a lot of fear and a lot of efforts for controlling us. So in the midst of all this, it's a wonderful thing that these people, the walk-ins, starseeds, and hybrids, are here with us helping. So they may not get to be world known, they may not get to be in the headlines, but in the meantime, they're just doing their wonderful work wherever they can. And it's really helping at least a good portion of humanity to be having a higher, more benevolent look at things, and helping us as a humanity to develop. So I think we're very fortunate to have these kinds of people with us.
I agree. And one question I have for both of you about walk ins is kind of based on a personal experience of mine. And my question is, can a walk in come in, do what it needs to do, and walk out and return to the other soul? Can that happen? Or once you walk in, you're there and the other original can't return?
Actually, what you're describing is what I've called in both of my books a soul overlay. And what will happen is the original soul of the body, which I refer to as the natal soul, will remain firmly intact. And another aspect will come in, overlay the soul, very much like a neoprene suit. So what happens is it kind of attaches together. This can serve as a battery charger. It can serve to bring massive amounts of information, or it can also serve as a placeholder if this soul needs to leave for whatever reason temporarily to have soul restoration, or to help out with another project. It will come back, and then this soul will either leave or the two of them will merge and become one. So that's one type, as the soul overlay. Then you have what's called a soul merger, where you have souls who it kind of resembles like an infusion, which I want to talk about first. So you can have more of your own higher self, more of your oversoul, more of your Shantias Khan, or multiple aspects of yourself, multidimensional aspects that come in and they fuse with the natal soul. But this fusion it remains intact. Okay. And so many people are doing that now. They have more and more information coming in, and they're not necessarily a walk-in, because with a soul walk-in infusion, a portion of the soul will leave, some of it will stay, and then you'll have more information to come in, more soul, and it attaches and remains as one. And the soul merger is where you have all the different aspects that come in and they kind of merge with the natal soul. But it's very possible that you have what's called a soul jumper, pop in, or a popper. Now, this refers to a soul that inhabits the body, and it only stays for a brief period of time. It can be hours, it can be weeks, it can be months, and it brings in massive amounts of information. And it's almost like the natal soul will take a back seat while this new soul is doing what it needs to do. Then it leaves, and the new soul comes back. So those are a couple examples of, really what you might be describing.
So, to give more clarity on it, what it was is there was a point in my life where it's like I had recently had a near death experience, and all of a suddenly I felt like I was looking at everything and excuse me. I felt like I was from the future in the present. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would know things that were coming, and had like kind of like precognition of things that were about to happen, and be like, yeah, I knew that was coming. Yeah, it's going to be okay. Yeah, it's not what they think it is. But then there was a point where I woke up one day and I was like, I have no idea what's coming anymore.
Yeah.
I no longer have that foresight and no longer felt like I'm my future self in the past. So that's
It's
why I
very
was wondering, yeah.
Yeah, it very well could be that you had a future aspect of yourself to come in as like a popper, or a jumper. Whatever comes in stays, it leaves information, it can awaken people, and then it goes about its journey. And the whole purpose could have been to assist with some type of next level soul awakening, because we can have many awakenings in our lifetime. We can wake up to the fact that maybe we're a lot more than we've been told that we are. And maybe those that always say, oh, we're from a certain location and we're here to help, we find out that maybe they're not from here to help us after all either. And so, there's those kinds of waking ups, but then there's also a deeper soul level that wakes up to the fact that you are a soul having a human experience, and you're not a human with a soul. That's very different, because on this planet everyone is called humans, and we're in this human spacesuit. The soul is. You go to another incarnation, you could be on another planet and you're in the Arcturian spacesuit, because that's the form that you need for that planet. Or the same thing with Palladians or, Andromedans, anyone. You can look at the form as simply the spacesuit for that experience.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, and so a question I have for both of you is, with Sheila, with you being the walk in and familiarity there, and Barbara with the regressions and everything, how did you guys meet and this book come about?
Well, I actually met Barbara at a conference and found out that she was coming to the Boulder area to be interviewed by Gaia TV. And she said she would arrive on a certain day and she was going to have X amount of time. And I said, ooh, can I have a regression during that time? And so she graciously agreed. And so I went to Boulder and met her for the first time there. And then I've had other regressions by Barbara, and we've stayed in touch over many, many things over the years. And when I was writing this book, the first book that I wrote was simply different stories from walk-ins, but I wanted this book to be much more comprehensive. I wanted it to expand on the different topics that I had talked about as walk-ins, and I felt that it was imperative to include star seeds and hybrids because a walk-in comes from somewhere. This soul doesn't just materialize all of a sudden, and it can be that a walk-in is a star seed. It can be that a walk-in comes in from an angelic realm. The walk-in can be, in my case, I came in as a collective aspect. It can be anything. But star seeds are very, very often what walks in to help fulfill these roles. So when I was looking at that and this, but I do know some walk-ins that also have a hybridized body. And they need that hybridized body at a future date to be able to carry the energy of the walk-in soul that arrives. And so who better to talk about star seeds, walk-ins, and hybrids than Barbara Lamb? So I did contact Barbara, and, I showed her or gave her the idea of what I was going to do for the book and asked if she would be so willing to write up some of the case studies and include those behind the sections of walk-ins, star seeds, and hybrids. And so if you read this book, when you read this book, you're going to find that behind every section, there's at least 5, and in one, there's 6 actual case studies of people who, under hypnosis, have realized that they're either a walk-in, a starseed, or a hybrid. So I was just thrilled when Barbara agreed to do that. So thank you again, Barbara. It really meant a lot.
And it was a wonderful thing for me, knowing all of this from these people I was working with and thinking, gosh, more people ought to know about these people being with us and their missions and what they're here for. And, I wasn't really doing much public speaking about that. I did speak a lot over the years about extraterrestrial experiences, but not in most cases, not focusing on walk-ins or star seeds or even hybrids. And so when Sheila invited me to do that, I just thought, oh, that's great, because I've been wanting to get this information out there too. So it's been a very happy collaboration. I'm absolutely done. Of course, it's wonderful to know Sheila, and she is such a shining example of a walk-in, because she has been doing so much to educate people and to encourage people who actually are starseeds to, recognize that in themselves and to go ahead and just give their work as they want to do. And she gives them a platform for them to speak in the Conscious Awakening Network. Oh my goodness, is full of people who are doing extraordinary work and have wonderful realizations. They must be star seeds, and probably some of them are walk-ins and hybrids as well. So she's giving them a platform to do what they came to do, in the kind of help that they are able to give. So it's just a good thing all the way around.
Thanks, Barbara. I was going to just say, I really do want to get as much of this information out as possible. And in January, we have a workshop coming up. It's a conference, actually, through the Conscious Awakening Network. And it's called Star Code Activations. It's only like $44 for the 2 days. And there's 12 different guests that will be coming on talking about their star-seededness, or the fact that they are a walk-in, or whatever else that they want to bring forward. And they're going to provide activations for people. And that's part of their mission as well. And there's so many people that are star seeds now that are starting their own podcast. And they're like, I just felt like I had to do this. I just had to do it. And that is a lot of that star seed mission.
Does that seem familiar, Michael? To
Yes,
you?
it does.
I bet.
I thought so.
I'm sure you're one of those wonderful kinds of people we've been talking about.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think I fit probably one or two of those categories. And one of the questions that I believe I asked you, Barbara, last month when you were on, you said that's more of a Sheila question. And I just remember, I think I'm remembering it right, is when you like have a walk-in and it's a star seed walk-in, do they leave a mark and that person then has elements of star seed left in them when they leave and can become starseed hybrid, or do they have to have that there to begin with and then they walk in, activate it, and that's how that comes about?
Well, that could be one scenario that occurs, that a star seed serves as a walk-in to help ignite a spiritual awakening and then leaves. And that's one of the things I would call like, a soul overlay, or one of the terms that I've used in the book to describe that process. But the other thing could be that the person, what I find most often is that the majority of the star seeds on this planet come in as the natal soul to the body, that original soul. And they wait until a certain time or a certain frequency on the planet happens, and then they instantaneously wake up. And that can be on their own without having any kind of a catalyst. Or like you said, it could be that a walk-in comes in, helps to activate that, and leaves. But most of the walk-ins that I know are permanent walk-ins. I'm a permanent walk-in. I came in for a very specific reason. I needed an adult form in which to carry this out. The soul of this body had agreed that it was time for them to go. I came in and I'm fulfilling my mission that way. And you can also have what's called like the soul step downs. And the soul step downs is when you actually end up having a soul that swaps. However, after it integrates, it leaves and another one comes in. And then another one comes in. And you can have multiple souls in there, not multiple personalities, but multiple souls in the body all at one time. And they're all taking like this dance that they're all participating in, and then they can all leave. So you can have one soul that occupies the body. You can have two or more, which ends up being a soul braid, which typically is permanent. But if you have these soul step downs, it's just like this dance. And it's like the body has agreed to serve as the host for this occurrence to take place. And I have met many people, and at first I was like, what? When they were telling me, they were like, well, I wasn't a walk-in from like Alpha Centauri. And then I had integrated and I was here for like 5 years. And then I had a new soul aspect that came in and I was a soul braid. And then the first walk-in left and another walk-in came in. And when I first started hearing this, I'm like, wow, I never even thought something like that could be possible. But I also didn't think what happened to me was even possible. And so I heard that more than one time. So it's like, wow. So that really started expanding my knowing of walk-ins. And I'll be honest, somebody can tell me something and they're like, I bet you don't believe that. And it's like, you know what? If I could become a walk-in, I believe anything is possible, because I did not believe something like this could happen. Never in a million. If you had told me 25 years ago I'd be sitting here talking on an interview about walk-ins and me being one, I would have laughed you out of the room. But that shows how that walk-in changed. And a lot of times that is a really key element for people to understand the difference. A star seed, excuse me, my little dog wants to participate. A star seed, a lot of times when they wake up, they remember where they're from. They feel a calling for their mission and they, go about it. A walk-in comes in for a very specific reason. And so when the walk-in arrives, everything in their life begins to change. But sometimes when they have these other aspects, it's a very gentle changing. So people will say, gosh, I don't know if I'm a walk-in or if I'm a starseed or if I've had a Kundalini awakening or what, has happened. And so if you begin to look at what is occurring in your life during the time that you felt something happened, that might be the clues. If you felt more like, I just feel like I've been dropped here and my family is out there, and you want to go out and start looking at the stars, chances are you might be a walk-in. A starseed, because a walk-in, when they come in, may or may not know where they're from, but they know that, they're locked in. They feel this, anchoring. They may not understand what it is, but there's like this solidification that happens when that soul exchange occurs. And like me, I walked around dazed and confused for years until I was able to fully integrate that energy. And so when you look, and in this book, we give really great signs on how you could determine if you're a walk-in, a starseed, or a hybrid, because hybrids are going to have certain maybe facial characteristics, or their hair may be a different color. I knew someone who had, the brightest yellow eyes that I've ever seen. And I was always mesmerized by that. And he had really black circles around the iris. And I have come to find out that a lot of times that black circling is an indication that someone could be a hybrid.
I'll have to check my eyes for that.
Yeah, go check your eyes, everybody. Everybody's going to say, I'm a hybrid. I got these dark rings, but I'm talking about like jet black, really dark rings around the exterior of the eyes. Several people have told me that are hybrid that, that was one of their characteristics.
I'm kind of curious. Oh, go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, just to pick up on your question, Michael, a hybrid, of course, would not become an unhybrid.
Right.
There was no such thing, because the hybrid from before birth, in most cases, have already received the genetics from the extraterrestrial beings. And so that's there for their life.
And same with a starseed. If a starseed is from a particular planet, they're from that particular planet. Right. They may wake up and have more soul remembrance because we're eternal beings. And, we've had lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. But a starseed, they may remember a lot of this, but they will have that affinity for a particular planet or a particular star system. So that's a great point, Barbara.
Right. And some of that comes out in some of the regressions, too, that a person will be regressing. They might not have been asking, what was I before this? They come in, with another question. And yet in some regressions, they find that they're among another group of beings, and eventually I ask them to look down at themselves as they are among the other beings, and they realize that, oh, they are one of them themselves. And in other words, they had been, we've gone into a past life experience in the regression, um, in which they were a member of that other group of beings out there on another planet. So that's been very, very interesting. And some of those beings that some of the people have regressed to being are quite different in the sense that some of them are half aquatic and half land livers. In other words, there are oceans and bodies of waters on some of the other planets, and some of the beings are really what we would call amphibians. Mm-hmm. So they can live and do live in the water, and they can also be on the land for certain periods of time. And that's a very interesting thing, to be a human and to experience that in a regression, that you had that sort of dual life on another planet. And some of the beings that they used to be are more like some of the ones that we hear about today, the more human-like ones. They don't look exactly like humans, but, kind of close to it. And then they in these regressions, they can get very involved in what they were doing with their group of fellow beings. And, it's very enlightening for these people to realize that. And they might not have ever known that if they had not had the regression. Yeah. So
Right.
there's much that can come out in those sessions.
We're actually at the hour. Do you have time to keep going for a few more questions, or?
I do.
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to be aware of the time and didn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
So one question I have is about if it's a sign of a walk-in. Is they say a lot of times your soul memory knows where pieces are, like, for retrieval. So you'll get a calling, like, say, oh, I really need to go to, say, Ireland. And you'll be drawn to Ireland until you go. But then there are times where I've felt, and I've heard people talk about being drawn to, say, go to, say, Chicago. Never go, but that drawing disappears. Could that be that a walk-in had come in and was drawing you to that place because that was a place for them, and they left, finished what they were doing, so that drawn feeling is no longer there?
Well, there's two parts to that as I'm hearing what you're saying. The first would be with the soul retrieval aspect. Typically, what happens is when someone is experiencing a soul retrieval, someone actually goes into non-ordinary reality to find that aspect. However, past life could be calling you to a land. It could be that maybe you lived in Ireland and your soul has that memory and it kind of aches for home and it really pulls you and draws you. There have been places that I have wanted to go and experience, and I'm like, if I go and spend too much time there, I may not want to come home, and so I'm thinking, okay, what's that about? But I think that, our soul is so multidimensional, and we are multidimensional beings. The other thing is, when I talk about an oversoul, if this is the oversoul, the fingers could all be multidimensional, or it could all be lifetimes that you're living simultaneously. It could be that there's an aspect of you here and an aspect of you in Ireland, just as there can be an aspect of you here and an aspect of you in all of the various dimensional levels, because we are multidimensional and we are always having different experiences somewhere, because the whole purpose of our beingness is to experience and to grow as those individuated source consciousness units.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I'd like to add to that for myself as a person, starting 30, 40 years ago, I started being extremely attracted to going to Egypt and also to go to Peru. I mean, that had been growing in me for a number of years, but suddenly I was aware of a wonderful trip with a wonderful leader going to Egypt, and I went and just knew that I had to go to Egypt. It was just a strong pulling that nobody else I knew felt that pulling, but I certainly did. So I went there, and in about 4 or 5 different places in that one trip, I had suddenly a very powerful memory in great detail of my having been there in a previous lifetime. Sometimes I was a man, a dark-skinned man, and sometimes I was, a more fair-skinned man or woman. But anyway, that really helped me to understand why I had been so deeply drawn to go to Egypt. And I went again a year and a half later to Egypt and had more of these spontaneous past life recalls. And at the point when they started to happen, I didn't even know about past lives. I had heard that there were certain people in India and various parts of the world that believed in reincarnation, but I didn't. I didn't know it was a reality until I started having these experiences. And that, wow, really grew my attention to it and my respect for that and for that belief. And all of that is why I got into regression therapy as part of my therapy practice, because I realized, wow, I have had these experiences, and I was finding that many others were too. And that's happened in other countries that I felt it was very important for me to go to. And sure enough, when I would be there for a while, one of these great, detailed, intensive memories would come up. So I think that's great too that we can find out about them. And what's especially rewarding is when you find spontaneously in a regression, you find out about a lifetime that you had in a particular place, and then you find that place later in your life. You get that validation. So that happened to me personally. I had a regression in 1989, and the regression took me to a wonderful home and marriage in England. Earlier, probably around the turn of the century, going into the 1900s, around that time period. And it was a very, very detailed regression. I got so many details of that home and property in the regression. And then 6 years later, I was in England researching a crop circle, and it happened to be near a home that I kept getting drawn to looking at. It's like my head just kept being turned around and looking at the back of that big house over there. And suddenly I realized, oh, that's the house that was my home in that happy life with the man who was my husband in this life. And he was my husband in that life too. And so I went and found that home, and it was exactly like I had remembered it from the past life regression. So that's happened to a number of people I've worked with in Scotland and in France and in China. In one case, one client had recovered in a regression lots of detail about the little village that he had grown up in China, probably a few centuries ago. And then subsequently, on a trip to China, he actually found that town with many of the features that were still there from when he had a lifetime. So that's exciting too.
That is exciting. And I actually find myself contemplating a thought of, and I don't know if I'm going too deep into the subject or if my mind is trying to play a game with me, but the question and the thought that came to mind was, so let's say you're working on soul memory work and you're working on something happens to where you become, quote, incapacitated. A walk-in comes in, helps you heal, get back on your feet and everything. Does that interfere with that soul work and cause that soul work to become null and voided, new soul work appear, or are they able to help with that soul work?
Well, really all of the above. Like in my case, my soul had reached an exit point and decided it was time to leave, which was an opening for me to be able to come in to pick up my work, because working on the crystalline grid, we were doing the same work there that I'm actually doing here as boots on the ground. But there, it's emanating the light codes. Here, I can spread the light codes through, working in somebody's holographic field, speaking light language, talking on podcast, working one-on-one with people. Whereas where we were in the crystalline grid, it has to infiltrate down through that collective consciousness. When you work on your soul memories or, that type of thing, that is the imprintation that has occurred from your soul melding with the physical genetics. Okay. And so you have all of these various memories that can come up at different times. And when you're working on healing certain things, like if I'm working with someone and I see in their field something that kind of looks like a Brillo pad, is what I call it, because it's all shiny and metallic looking, and we pull that, it could be that one of those threads that you're working on that has been blocking energy could be from a past life. It could be from a galactic life. It can also be from your like the ancestral lineage that you're coming from. And so when my case, when I came in, the body was instantaneously healed because I no longer had resonance with the physical structure. I came in with my own resonance, okay? And then what allowed it to attach was the fact that out here in the spiritual bodies, there was already that grid. Now, a lot of times people will have experiences with extraterrestrials that will heal the body and then they leave, or they'll have experiences from angelic beings that come in and heal the body and leave. They also have had experiences with multiple, multidimensional aspects of themselves that come in, maybe from the future that come in. Maybe you have someone come in from a past life that was a healer or a medicine person, and they come in and provide healing for the body, and then they leave. But typically what I find is when a walk-in enters, it's for a very specific purpose, and they typically come in to stay and to carry out a mission. And in my case, one of the byproducts was that the body instantaneously healed.
Okay. And another thing, and I think I brought this up with you, Barbara, on our last episode, and was if you have a walk-in scenario where, like, you say got sick, we're in the hospital in a coma, walk-in comes in, says, hey, there's a free body here, starts to enter and does its thing and starts moving, and wakes you up, and it's like, oh, everyone's so thrilled you're back. But then like you're saying, the natal soul that's the original says, wait a minute, this is my body, I want it back. Does that ever happen?
Yeah. Walk-ins are always by invitation. There's always an agreement between the souls. What you're describing is more of like a possession when an uninvited soul tries to enter into the body. And it could be that the soul is not malevolent. It could be that they are benevolent. They just happen to be in that field, the energy field of the body, especially if someone's in a coma. That energy field can be weakened or depleted and another soul can come in. But I have known people whose physical body was in a coma and they used that as the opportunity to move on, and a new soul came in. And when that person woke up from the coma, they were not the soul that left, they were the new soul. And in this case, the lady was telling everybody, I'm from the 13th dimension and I'm this and I'm that. And of course, they wanted to move her out of intensive care into the psych ward. And but she said, I learned I had to stop, talking so much about it. But there are instances when a walk-in will enter the body, and in a case of a coma, heal the body, and the body will awaken.
You mean the walk-in would leave?
No, the walk-in doesn't leave. The walk-in would stay. Typically the only time that I know when the walk-ins leave is when it's a very short term, like a jumper or a pop-in, and they're here to actually impart information, or they're here to experience something or to help someone through, a really hard time, and then they will leave. 9 times out of 10, that's part of your own soul coming in to assist. It can be a higher dimensional aspect. It can be a multi-dimensional aspect, but they come in to assist you. And then the other time is when you have the soul braids, where 2 souls are together, and then one soul can leave and the other soul occupies the body. But typically once they braid, then they're braided forever. It's very unlikely. I know we've talked about a lot of different soul rotations and the way things can happen, but typically once a walk-in comes into the body, it stays in the body.
Okay, and one aspect I'm curious about, and I don't know if it can be classified as walk-in, is like the organ transplants. When they say, like, you get a heart from somebody, they put it in, and that person automatically starts to feel attraction towards somebody else because that's who the heart knew in the previous body. So is that aspect like kind of like walk-in, where the person is attached to the organ and is now walked into that body and is fusing, or how would you characterize that scenario?
That is a beautiful example of the cellular memory imprinting, because you have to remember when we are born, we have the genetic codes that come in through our divine human template that comes in from, our ancestral lineage, our mom and our dad. Then we also have the epigenetics of the soul that come in, and the 2 of them merge. All right. That's what makes you you, and that's what makes me me. And that soul is the personality of this lifetime. If the soul were to leave, or if an organ were to go out of my body into someone else, I have imprinted on that organ. My ancestral lineage is in that organ. My soul lineage is in that organ. And if you put it in someone else and the body accepts it, then that soul memory begins to merge with theirs. And sometimes that memory can be very, very strong.
So I wonder, do they then, like, say I had karmic stuff that I was working on, I get in an accident, they take an organ out of me, put it in somebody else, and I recuperate, that person recuperates, and they accept the organ, does that mean the karmic work that I was doing becomes theirs as well?
No, the
Or
karma belongs to the soul, and the karma is imprinted into the cellular structure, but it's not in the organs. So when someone receives an organ, they're not receiving that person's karma, but they are receiving some of that genetic lineage and where the soul had imprinted. So it could be that this was an Arcturian soul going into, say, a Palladian body, and they may start having memories of, being in another star system. But as far as I know, I've never met anyone or have read any studies that show that karma is passed through an organ. But that's an excellent question, because
Oh,
the soul does imprint onto the organs and everything else. But the organ, the reason that person might begin to have a few memories is because of the body accepting that organ. But you have to look at, that's a few cells versus the cells of the body, and that person's cellular structure and genetics will begin to override that of the organ, and it becomes part of the body.
okay. And actually, just out of a even another level to that is, say I was doing shadow work on something, organ gets transplanted over, and that person starts showing signs of what I was working on. Is the shadow work transferable because it's soul work that we're working on? And can that person take on and help fix, well, not fix, but help learn and evolve the same technique? In which case, you'll all of a sudden be like, oh, wait a minute. I thought I had to work on this, but now I understand this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they did work, and it's talking, the body's still talking back and forth.
It very well could be that the organ can help pass information on, but that will be kind of a temporary sort of thing, because the organ itself will become part of the genetic structure of the person. And the overall energy, the overall essence, the overall genetics of that person eventually will take over, and then that organ actually becomes part of that person. However, it can definitely retain memories. We watch movies about that all the time. I've just personally never met anyone who's had that kind of an experience, but again, I'm open to everything. So I'm definitely going to talk to my collective about that one. Those are excellent questions, Michael.
yeah, they are.
Oh, thank you. I have my moments.
You certainly do. Yeah, it'd be
And
nice to hear more about you sometime.
I'd be happy to share when maybe we'll do an episode in 2025 where you guys ask me questions.
Yeah,
There you go.
really, it would be very worthwhile, I'm sure, and maybe would help to kind of clear up a few things for you as well.
I'd be totally open to that.
Yeah, because you obviously had some notable experiences and realizations.
More than I probably would like to share, and there are times where I sit there and go, man, what I just went through, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm glad you survived it.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can get back together at
Yeah.
another date and time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd love to have you both on. And there is one question in the chat room that I feel like we've kind of touched on, but I just want to see if you want a chance to add clarity to. And Jim is saying a lot of children are having past life memories. Could they be walk-in?
They could be walk ins, but a lot of times what happens is more and more children today are coming in fully awakened, meaning that that veil of forgetfulness is very thin or not there at all. And they are remembering other lives. Now, typically, what will happen is from the time children are about 2 or 3 up until they're about 7 or 8, they will have a lot of the other side memories. I know even my children, my son talked about a hunting accident with his brother. And, of course, I'm like, well, honey, you don't have a brother. And he's like, no, in my other life. Or
Oh,
he would say
yeah.
things like, I remember when I was heaven and I was talking to so and so on a cloud, and they made me all these promises and they never kept them. Or he would just start crying about different things. And he had those memories. Now, as almost a 30-year-old man, he doesn't remember any of those things. But as a mom, it's like, I'll never forget that, because it really is profound at the time. So children are very open at that age. And it seems like after about 7, 8 years old, that memory starts to shut down, whether it's through their friends, through the parental beliefs or systems that are being passed down to them. A lot of that seems to close down. But, it is possible that, I do know some people that say that during the birth process, that the soul of the body at the last minute said, I've changed my mind. I'm out of here. And that infant was going to be stillborn. However, at the last minute, another soul came in. And so, in those instances, that was a walk in at a young age, and they may be awake and they may share. That walk in could also be from a star system, but the soul of that body could also be a star seed that is the original soul to that body. And they happen to have all of these memories of other planets or even, past lives. So, yeah, it's very, very possible.
And that raises an interesting question because I, obviously I have no memories of being in the womb, but I have like my middle sister and my older sister would always tease us and say, "You guys were supposed to be twins, and you guys ate your twin, and you were born separate." And I was like, you know,
Sounds like an older sibling.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I started, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, obviously, I didn't eat my twin, but I started, going, well, I can sometimes feel a deeper connection to one sister over the other. Is there a possibility we were twins and separated? But then I was like, I don't think so. But I wondered, though, if being there was a twin, but the twin, like you're saying, decided I'm not going to, and it just disappeared. Is that possible?
I do know of a lady who is a geneticist, actually, and she became a doctor because of this very situation that you're talking about. She was a twin in utero, and the body, there was something wrong with that form, and that body ended up deteriorating, but the soul never left. And so that soul, she actually carried, she was both the sister and the brother. She had these twin souls that she was born with. And of course, the boy aspect had more of an affinity for the mother, which a lot of sons do, and the daughter had the affinity for the father, which a lot of daughters do. And so you can take on personality traits, being in the womb together, but also, you could have had past lives together. It's really, honestly, Michael, it's just this unlimited plethora of scenarios and possibilities.
Another
Right.
possibility, too, when there's one missing, like the missing twin, they know early in the pregnancy that the woman is carrying twins, and then at a certain point, that other twin just isn't there anymore, and everybody's puzzled. Even the doctors are very puzzled. But what has happened in some of those cases, we find out, is that the missing twin was actually removed by the extraterrestrials and is going to be gestated further in a tank on the ship and will be, quote unquote, born when developed enough and live life on the ship with the other beings. And in some cases that I know about and have worked with, the twin that was born here and lives life here always has a sense of, almost communicating, in some cases, actually communicating with that twin who's up on the ship, growing up with the other beings. And in other words, there's a telepathic sort of thing that goes on between the two of them. And so the twin who's remaining here is very happy to have that relationship with the missing twin. And so often nobody understands that, when the one here talks about, right. Oh yeah, I was with my twin brother last night, or oh yeah, he popped in, or we had a wonderful conversation. So it can be a lifelong relationship that they actually have, although one's on a spaceship or another planet and the other one is here. And then there are cases too that I know of when the twin was missing and the one remaining here always felt a great sense of missing that one. So maybe they don't have any communication. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But there's always that sort of longing or missing, or I don't feel complete, or there's something wrong with my being in life, because they're actually missing the one that they were in the womb with. And of course, it's very difficult for the parents of the twins that were carried in the womb to have one of them suddenly disappear forever. But that does actually happen sometimes.
Yeah. And although we don't talk about that particular scenario in our book, we do have a lot of regressions, and we have tons of information in here about walk-in starseeds and hybrids. So, this is a book designed that people can pick it up and they can read a certain section and just set it down and come back to it later. It would be great to read it from front to back, but you can also just, open it up, and it's kind of like, what do I need to know for now kind of book. And it's like, oh, we have a walk-in hypnotic regression. And you read about that and it's like, I was just wondering about that myself. And so there's so much information in this book that I really think that anyone who has any questions about being a walk-in starseed or a hybrid, will have at least a good start on where they can go. And it can help them to have some of those questions that for many years I didn't have answers to.
Right. Many readers might identify with a particular one of these types of people, being a walk-in, like you were wondering yourself, Michael, or people recognize, oh, I must be a starseed. I fit all those criteria. Or, wow, maybe I'm a hybrid because I have a lot of the features in me that the hybrids in this book have. Yeah. So it can be very enlightening for people. And then for people who are not one of those three types, it can be just extremely interesting, or help them to understand somebody who might be in their lives. You might think, oh, that's why my sister is that way. I bet she had a walk-in experience. Or she may be a starseed because she's always been talking about spirituality and the stars and other beings that she somehow knows about. I don't know why she knows about them, but she does, and so it can be exciting for people to recognize these features in maybe themselves or some of the other people they know. Or if they don't know anybody like that, it's just so expanding to realize that we do have these three types of beings here with us.
Yeah. So, I do appreciate the opportunity to come on tonight and talk about it because, the book can serve as a lifeline, and it can also serve, as an informational piece for people. And, if people have additional questions, maybe we can come back at another time.
I would love that. And I just want to clarify that when I was born, the doctors never told my parents I was a twin. I was never identified as a twin in the womb. It was just something that my oldest sister told us. And I was like, I don't know why it stuck in my head, because I'm like, if I was a twin, I'm sure there would have been a record somewhere of it. But it was like, yeah, it just strikes me sometimes how a statement like that can't be true sticks with you. And it's like, why? What is the truth in it that I can't let this go?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah. I wonder what was going on with her, that she had that powerful thought about you having a twin. Yeah, I just I'm interested in where that came from in her.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing is we don't talk very much anymore, so it's like we gravitated apart because our beliefs, I think, became so different that there was like no common ground anymore. So they just went their way, I went my way, and we talk every once in a while on surface level stuff, and then it's dormant again.
That happens with a lot of people in a lot of families, I think. And there's some sadness about that.
Yeah, it's hard because it's like everybody will being nice will say, well, where are they? How are they? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't answer either of those questions. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, it's been this way for several years, decades even. And it's like, and I've thought about it, and I feel like there is an aspect of truth to the statement of when so much time goes by, it does get harder and harder to mend a fence, so to speak. And so I feel like because it's been like almost 30 years now since we've really talked.
Wow.
I've kind of got to the feeling of I don't think it's going to happen this lifetime. Getting together, mending, reconnecting, and everything. I'm like, I just think there's way too much history in between.
Another thing is too, I think that sometimes we're in a family with somebody who is very different than we are. And I came to the conclusion about that because I had a brother 2 years older, and that was my only sibling. And right from the beginning, it just seemed like we were on really, really different wavelengths. And he was an okay brother, but I mean, we didn't have a bad time together. But the more that he developed into who he is, the more I realized I'm not that way. And it helped me to discover who I am, just by the contrast of who he is and what he was going for in his life. The way he wanted his life to be was really different than the way that I wanted my life to be. So it helped me to define myself more because of that. And maybe it helped him. I don't know. But we never really had a close. I think we liked each other. I think we had some love for each other, even, but we never had a really close relationship because I just think we were so different, and that was okay, basically. And I think turned out actually in the long run to be an advantage. Like when I became a therapist, he just was totally baffled. Like, what's a therapist? And why would you? What drew you into that? Well, he was busy being a very effective businessman and earning $1 million, which was his aim. And so, I mean, yeah, it's useful in some ways to be very different than the one you grow up with, or even your parents. You might be very, very different from what your parents want in life and what they want for you. And it may fit you or not, which again helps you to get more of a sense of who you are and what you're all about and why you're here.
Right. And one of the gifts I got from it was I used to think family was blood. You always stick with blood. And then through this experience, I learned family are the people who are around you, support you,
Right.
and are there for you,
Yeah.
whether they're blood or not. That's your true family. So I got
Absolutely.
a
Yeah.
different definition.
Yeah. That sort of grows over the years. It's this wonderful man, Richard Bach, I think his name is, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Richard Bach, I think.
It is.
He wrote another book after that called Illusions.
Mm-hmm.
And in the margins of the book, every once in a while, every several pages, he has a little quote, a little saying. And I just found those fantastic, reading that in the 1970s or 60s or whenever that was. And one of them, one of these little sayings was, the people you grow up in your household with are not necessarily your real family.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same thing that you're saying, Michael.
Right.
It's sort of
Yeah.
in slightly a different way, but and I think that is true for many people. And then there are people who are very, very close with their family or with one person in the family. Uh, a woman came yesterday for a regression and brought her mother, and she and her mother are very close. They're absolutely best friends, and they're on the same wavelength of growing and developing. And so as one grows and shares with the other one grows. Like they're both going to get a lot out of the regression that the daughter did yesterday, I'm sure, because she'll share everything about that regression and what she learned. So, but it's just different for everybody in their family how that is. And
Right.
you don't have to be particularly close to somebody or to anybody in your family, because it may be here that you're here for a totally different reason. uh, you've got a different life plan, and yet there are certain features about being in that family that were good, that you chose to be helpful to you, but it certainly may not be in the way that you think or feel or what you're aiming for in your life.
Right. And I want to take a moment and just say thank you both for coming on. It is getting late, and I know you have places to go, and it's getting late here as well. And I appreciate very much you guys coming on and sharing your book and your stories and everything.
You're welcome. It's
Yeah,
been a
thank you.
pleasure.
And so I promise we'll have you guys back on in 2025 and we'll continue this. I think this is truly fascinating, and I am open to, like you guys mentioned, interviewing me, so to speak, on the show. And
Yeah,
so stay tuned. That may happen. And
that would
before
be
we go, where
good.
can people find the book? And I know, Sheila, you mentioned your website,
Mhm.
so people can find you there. Barbara, where can people find you as well?
Okay, my website is Barbara Lamb, Lamb. So Barbara Lamb Regression. And there's also a YouTube channel where I have quite a number of podcasts about different interesting subjects. And that YouTube channel is Barbara Lamb ET Regressions. Yeah, so both places people can find me. They can
Okay.
also mail me if they want through the website.
And you can find our book. Well, it is on my website, SheilaSeppi.com, or you can also find it on Amazon. So we hope that you guys will enjoy the book. And again, thank you so much for the invitation. We appreciate it. And I'll say good night to everyone out there. And thanks.
Yes, good night and thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Good night, and thank you to the chat room and to everyone watching this. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.